Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Joining me right now is Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff. He's the ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee. And Congressman, they are really the Republicans, the members of this committee, and we've been watching it very closely. The House Judiciary really going after Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, and even threatening that he might be held in contempt, even impeachment, because the Justice Department, they say, is failing to turn over to them documents involving the Hillary Clinton investigation. Your reaction?
Well, Wolf, this is a show being put on for the president's benefit. This is collaboration with executive masquerading as oversight. If you're going to call this oversight at all, it's the most obsequious kind of oversight that says we will do anything we can in the service of the president. They brought these witnesses in just to badger them, just to potentially give the president an excuse for firing one of them, Rod Rosenstein, so that they can alter the course of the Mueller investigation. But make no mistake, they will continue to ask for documents in a pending investigation involving the President of the United States, something the President has no right to, so that they can be fed either directly or indirectly to the President's legal defense team. This is what Rudy Giuliani has made so clear, his expectation. But more than that, they're interested in a fight with the Justice Department to give this President a pretext to take action against Rod Rosenstein.
And you saw this morning, the president on his Twitter feed, he was really going after the entire Russia investigation. Let me read to you a couple of these tweets and get your reaction. When is Bob Mueller, he's the special counsel leading the Russia investigation, he says, when is Bob Mueller going to list his conflicts of interest? Why has it taken so long? Will they be listed at the top of his $22 million report? And what about the 13 angry Democrats? Will they list their conflicts with Crooked H, Hillary Clinton? How many people will be sent to jail and persecuted on old and totally unrelated charges? There was no collusion, and there was no obstruction of no collusion. And what is going on in the FBI and Department of Justice with Crooked Hillary, the Democratic National Committee, and all of the lies? A dismal situation. He has been doing this now for weeks and weeks, trying to undermine the credibility of the entire Russia probe. And it does seem to be having an impact, if you look at polls, with a certain element of the American public.
Well, it has an impact, and as I think Senator Corker pointed out, he has developed a certain cult-like following among some of the members of Congress. And this is his goal. It's to discredit the Mueller investigation. We cannot, I think, be oblivious to how, over the course of time, he has numbed us to these violations of policy, of norms of office, norms of behavior. I mean, Wolf, this is an investigation implicating the President of the United States. Even in completely unrelated investigations, the President of the United States is not supposed to be dictating to the Justice Department how they should conduct an investigation or who they should investigate or how. So even doing that would violate policy. But to do it in a case involving your own liability, your own exposure, is just an outrageous assault on the rule of law. This is a president that says, I am above the law, not like any other American. For other Americans who may be under investigation, they have no right to see materials in the investigative files until they're indicted, and neither does this president. But sadly here, we have all too many members of Congress willing to prostrate themselves before the executive and give him anything he wants.
You want to name names? Which members of Congress are in this cult-like group that you're suggesting?
Well, you know, the four horsemen of this apocalypse have been Devin Nunes and Trey Gowdy, Mark Meadows, and Jim Jordan. They have been leading the charge basically to require the Justice Department to give them materials that can be leaked or fed or misrepresented, like the infamous Nunes memorandum, in the service of the president. And in the meantime, they do enormous damage to these institutions. Ultimately, they'll be held accountable. I think when this chapter of history is written, it will condemn the president in the strongest terms. It will also condemn this Congress and these architects for undermining our system of checks and balances.
The president also tweeted once again suggesting he has doubts that Russia actually did interfere in the U.S. presidential election in 2016. He tweeted this: "Russia continues to say they had nothing to do with meddling in our election." He's made these suggestions several times over the past year, even though Obama administration officials, leaders of the intelligence community, they concluded that Russia did interfere with the intention of trying to help Trump against Hillary Clinton in the election. But even the president's own intelligence chiefs, the director of national intelligence, Dan Coats, the former CIA director, Mike Pompeo, now the Secretary of State, and so many others, they have all said Russia not only interfered in the presidential election in 2016, but continues to interfere and will interfere in the midterm elections coming up in November.
Well, this is exactly right. And it takes your breath away to consider that the President of the United States is basically disputing the conclusions, the bipartisan conclusions of his own intelligence professionals, of the members of Congress, and suggesting that we don't know whether the Russians did it, or that we should credit the word of this former KGB operative, Vladimir Putin. It's preposterous, but it's also dangerous, because here he is about to go into some summit with Vladimir Putin. And what is he doing again on the eve of that? He's undermining his own country. He's undermining his own intelligence agencies and saying, I'm more apt to believe Vladimir Putin than my own people. Here he is saying Russia should be brought back into the G8 without asking for anything, without asking for Russia to get out of Ukraine. No, this president is ready to make any concessions.
Why?
Well, either he is the worst negotiator in history, or there is some ulterior motive. There is some leverage the Russians hold over the President of the United States.
What do you believe?
I don't know. I don't know. It certainly may be in part due to this bizarre admiration and fascination he has with authoritarian figures. But there's this particular affinity for Vladimir Putin. And one of the things that I think needs to be investigated by the special counsel, by the Congress, is whether the Russians were laundering money through the Trump Organization, and this is leverage they're applying to the President of the United States. That would be far more compromising, in my view, than any salacious
Have you seen
video.
any evidence of that?
We've certainly heard testimony about the indicia of money laundering, enough to raise credible allegations that need to be investigated. And indeed, where we had credible allegations before of secret Trump associate meetings with the Russians, when we did look into them, they proved to be all too true. This allegation we were not allowed to investigate by the Republicans. I hope Mueller is doing it. If not, it needs to be done. I think it's negligent for us not to know the answer.
It is Friday, the 29th of June of 2018, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam, and our daily special is Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life, indeed. Well, folks, what a day that was yesterday, huh? And what a weekend is going to be this weekend. I want to start off first mentioning the shooting in Annapolis at the Capitol Gazette. And this fellow who, by all evidence so far, harbored a bit of an animosity towards social order. Is that one way of putting it? And apparently didn't realize that, when you're arrested and convicted, it's a part of the public record. And that's how we live in a democracy. And apparently he doesn't like that and didn't want to move to another country where they don't do that. and decided to take it out on the messenger. This is after, think about what his crime was. He had stalked a woman for 3 years and stalked a woman for a considerable amount of time. She moved 3 times out of state, and he continued. And all he got was a misdemeanor conviction, though. Isn't that something? But, misdemeanor, you can stop a gun. That's okay. But regardless of that, so then he threatened the paper over a period of time. They knew who he was. I know. You can't presume that everybody's going to go off the deep end. But his crime, stalking this woman, and all the paper did really was tell her story. Think about that for a moment. And then juxtapose it with the guy out in Santa Barbara. And others in this weird right-wing libertarian Trump Cult 45 incel movement. So I don't know. She warned the woman who had been stalked, warned that he's going to, told the cops there in that jurisdiction, he will be your next mass shooter. I didn't know the place had another mass shooter before that, but I think we get what she means. Okay. So the other big one is Anthony Kennedy's retirement and how it came so suddenly. We had been talking recently about that he had hired his clerks. And that's usually indicative that if you're going to be working for the next year, you don't hire your staff, get them all ready to move and all that sort of stuff. And then quit. It usually doesn't happen. And I say usually because in this world there are no absolutes. It's just the nature of physics here in this plane of existence. There are no absolutes. But somehow Anthony quit just suddenly. And then we find out, and I don't know how. Well, I guess any of us could have dug into it and didn't, because I didn't. Anthony Kennedy's son, Justin, that fellow, his son, had been Trump's personal banker at Deutsche Bank, in which Trump got $1 billion over $1 billion loans when no one else would ever loan to him, and Deutsche Bank paid, $630 million for laundering a bunch of Russian mob money. Coincidence? I keep telling everybody it was a horse's head that made up Anthony's mind. It's like a tale of two Tonys. Think of that. You got Tony Scalia and you got Tony Kennedy. And you give both of them a choice. And then you got the Tony who's got like a convenient heart attack and a pillow over his face in the middle of nowhere. And that's the middle of nowhere, Texas, by the way. And then you got the other Tony, and, he's got a legacy, and he's got a kid, and he got $1 billion, and, one Tony saw what happened to the other Tony, and Tony made up his mind. A tale of two Tonys, indeed. Well, what's on the rest of the menu? Well, I should mention that was, of course, Adam Schiff at the top there. Speaking with Wolf Blitzer, because Wolf Blitzer is a war correspondent. Okay, I'll be here all weekend, indeed. Then on the rest of the menu, Russian oligarchs were invited to Trump inaugural events meant for big money donors. Coincidence? Maybe. The only thing is, Mueller wants to know why. Yes, he does. What else in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy? Well, 133 politicians have been murdered in the last 9 months leading up to Mexico's elections. 133. But it's mostly local. Local politicians, sort of like local press. The Capital Gazette. Did you know the Capital Gazette has been around since even before the beginning of our great experiment. In fact, I think it was on Rachel's show where she said that when the Bill of Rights was ratified, it was on page 2 because they had some more important pressing local news. That's how local they are. Well, in Mexico, I guess they figured, the best way to mess up democracy, if all politics are local. I guess. Well, finishing up in the Bistro Cafe, part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Putin knows exactly how to play Trump at their upcoming meeting. He does. He'll tell him that he's a good boy. And thank you. Thank you for getting us that extra justice on the Supreme Court. We have some other plans too, please. Well, after the break, we then move to the chef's table, where Trump inspires Canadians to boycott American products and buy Canadian. How dare he? And French Holocaust survivor and women's rights icon Simone Veil will be given the rare honor of a burial at the Pantheon in Paris on Sunday. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com is the chat room link on the rightish of the page, monitored by Kelly Lincoln, our roaring girl. So be careful. She does it so diligently. Thank you, Kelly. To the leftish of the chat room link at the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com are the contribute donate buttons, and those are important, integral parts to this operation because we are unable to do this without you. Thank you for your generosity in allowing us to do this, because Resistance Radio still pays their bills and always will. We're not like the other side. Okay, and you can follow Netroots Radio on Twitter at Netroots Radio. How easy is that? Tom takes care of that platform. You can also follow Netroots Radio on Facebook, and I'm supposed to take care of that, but Facebook takes care of itself. You know they do. You can follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I post show notes and links on Daily Co's about 10 minutes before showtime. And I'm on Daily Co's as Justice Putnam. How easy can that be? Okay, just remember, Putnam, man spelled backwards. Okay, as I keep telling everybody, we're the higher class of putts. Okay. Just, that's how we like to think of it. And what else? Oh, of course, West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy can be followed on Twitter at Cookbook West. And West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is also on Facebook as West Coast Cookbook. Oh, my gosh. Yeah. One other thing. Get this out of the way. It is Friday. Get podcasts of the show on iTunes, Stitcher, Spreaker, TuneIn, etc., etc., etc. And I haven't mentioned this for a little while. The show music on the show is provided by the lovely Frances Livings, and links to her work and upcoming events are on the show notes and links diary. Okay. Let's see. Before I get into this Russian oligarch story, Adam Schiff was really calling out these onerous Republicans. Brown shirts is sort of what they are. Getz and Jordan, they're the Freedom Caucus idiots, the Tea Party people. Kind of makes you wonder about how AstroTurf the Tea Party was and where their money came from? Because we all just assume it's part of the Koch network, the Peterson network. But they get a lot of money from the NRA too, don't they? And we know where the NRA is getting. What was it, 30 million or more? Or that's just what they've been spending. So that's an interesting aspect too, because if there are collaborators within the midst of the halls of Congress, if there are, we already know there are, and that's called the GOP party. I want to know how many rubles are in their wallet, don't you? It's nothing new. Okay, Russian oligarchs were invited to inaugural events meant for big money donors, and Mueller wants to know why. I can explain that to Mueller, and he knows why, but he has to codify it. Because he's a prosecutor, he's an investigator. We all know why Russian oligarchs were invited to a big money donor event. Because they're big money donors. Only thing is, it's illegal to take money from foreign entities, isn't it now? Mm-hmm. This is by Travis Geddes out of Raw Story, by the way. Russian oligarchs attended invitation-only inauguration day events typically reserved for top donors. And Special Counsel Robert Mueller is investigating why they were there. The billionaires attended exclusive events in Washington, D.C. following Donald Trump's inauguration. And Mueller's team and congressional probes are interested in the Russian guests who had no obvious place in the campaign's diplomatic orbit. Well, wait a second. Obvious place? Of course not. That's why the back channels were created. And why would you have a back channel? To hide it from people like Mueller. Okay. They don't need to be spies in the James Bond sense, said Matthew Olson, former director of the National Counterterrorism Center. They are powerful people with significant wealth who are in a position to exert influence on U.S. policymakers, Olson added. And they're in a position to report back to Russian intelligence services on what they're able to learn. Sort of like what we do. So it makes it okay then, doesn't it? A guest list obtained by ABC News shows Victor Vekselberg. We've spoken about him before. Head of the global Renova Group, and later sanctioned by the U.S. Department of Treasury, and his American cousin Andrew and Trader. Well, they were seated at a formal dinner next to attorney Michael Cohen and his family. Well, to be fair, Michael Cohen and his family are Russians. Okay. Let's be clear about that. And she's married, she being Cohen's wife, is the daughter of one of the big oligarchs and one of Putin's best friends. Such a small world we live in. Let's see. And Trader's investment firm, Columbus Nova, later signed Cohen to a $1 million consulting contract. Because it's networking. That's how you network. You get in the right circles. Next thing you know, you're getting indicted and thrown in jail for being a traitor to your country. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Beckelsberg and Trader were stopped late last year at a New York airport, as we spoke about earlier this year as well, by federal agents and questioned as part of the Mueller probe. The candlelight dinner the pair attended with Cohen was reserved for $1 million contributors, according to the guest list. Oh, just small fry then. Some of the oligarchs also attended a 500-guest black-tie dinner with close Trump friends, high-ranking campaign aides, and foreign dignitaries, including then-Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak. He's like the Zelig of this whole thing. At least one Russian was allowed into a highly exclusive luncheon at the U.S. Capitol, hosted by the Joint Congressional Committee on Inaugural Ceremonies. It's incredibly unusual, said Stephen Kerrigan, who planned both Obama inaugural celebrations, particularly if they were going to be within arm's reach of the president. They went through an intensive vetting process. Well, how else are you going to be able to give away state secrets in the Oval Office eventually? As filmed by Russian TV for the world and the world to see. Kerrigan said every guest at the festivities he planned was closely scrutinized for foreign ties. Anonymous worker bees at the Agence France Presse give us this next offering here at the Bistro Cafe, part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. A total of 133 politicians have been murdered in the run-up to Mexico's elections on Sunday, as violence gripping the country exploded into politics on a record scale. The murders, mostly of local-level politicians, the most frequent targets for Mexico's powerful drug cartels, were recorded between September, when candidate registration opened, and the close of campaigning on Wednesday, when an interim mayor was killed in the western state of Michoacan. The victims included 48 candidates running for office, 28 who were killed during the primary campaigns, and 20 during the general election campaigns. And this violence has been concentrated at the local level. At least 71% of these attacks have been against elected officials and candidates running for office at the local level, said the consulting firm Atelex Ruben Salazar. These are the people who ran the data on this, by the way. This is the result of very serious problems of governability at the local level, he told Mexican radio network Formula. Just one of the victims was running for federal office. It is by far the most violent election on record in Mexico, which also registered a record number of murders across the board last year, with 25,339. Well, that's going to hurt the tourist trade. Okay, in the 2012 elections, there were only 9 politicians murdered and 1 candidate for federal office. Mexico has been hit by a wave of violence since the government deployed the army to fight drug trafficking in 2006. Well, you know, it's an arms race now, isn't it? And where are they getting their arms? Well, if we own 5 times as much as the rest of the world, I think we got a few to sort of, share for a price. Okay, Mexico will elect a new president on Sunday. Congress and thousands of state and local officials also on Sunday, following a campaign where corruption and violence have been dominant issues. All right, last offering here in the Bistro Cafe, part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, is an article by D. Pervaz out of Think Progress. Now, let us all rest assured that Trump will run victory laps after a summit with Putin, just like he did with Kim Jong-un. Okay, no matter what happens, he's going to be running around saying, "Oh, it was a great thing." And next thing you know, that any sort of concessions that might be alluded to on Russia's part will turn out just like how North Korea's nuke program has been jump-started again. Interesting, isn't it? Now, there's certain aspects of what's going to happen here that is being speculated by an analyst by the name of Weber, and if I could just... Yuval Weber is a fellow at the Daniel Morgan Graduate School of National Security and a global fellow at the Woodrow Wilson Center, and he had his take on the bilateral meeting. He says that we're going to be trading Syria for the Ukraine. And from the get-go, Trump wanted to get the United States out of Syria and to minimize that particular fight. So maybe we'll just team up and take over the Ukraine with Vlad. It'll be kind of like a partnership. It'll bring us closer together. If we can work together with the Russians, it's a good thing, isn't it? Well, I suppose it was a good thing to work with Charles Manson when he was going to slit your throat, too, wasn't it? Well, not him personally, but his cronies. So, yeah, they're going to trade Syria for the Ukraine. What about election meddling and collusion? Forget about that. Never happened because Russia said it never happened. And you got to take them on their word. Our allies? Well, they're all just a bunch of people trying to feed at the trough of our largesse. Stop that. So how will Putin play Trump? Before heading to Helsinki to meet Putin, Trump will be in Belgium for 2 days for a NATO meeting, and Weber predicted he will harangue everyone about not paying enough for defense because he doesn't identify how NATO actually works. Okay. Trump is then scheduled to go to the UK, where the attempted assassination of a former Russian spy and his daughter will no doubt come up, and he'll likely be asked to press Putin on the issue. Putin will not like this, and in this state of feeling, very put upon, he will go to see Putin, where he will be made to feel like a star. Because he is. So, Kim Jong-un let Trump feel like a star. And when Trump feels like the most important person in the room, that's when he's much more amenable to whatever big ideas others have. Okay. And forget about the nukes. The nukes that Russia has, forget about them. Okay. He's gonna keep them. And Weber continues, Trump says that these are good because the U.S. has the most. Since we have the most nukes, he can keep his. It's all right. So are you going to get the guy who doesn't know what the nuclear triad is to talk about weapons reductions with Vlad? They're not talking weapons reductions. Trust me. All right. Well, let's get to our break. We're going a little late, but it's Friday. It's Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. Okay? Well, let's get to our break. We will come back, go through weather from around the world, and then finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Christopher Intagliata. The animal kingdom is crowded with species that use sound, growls and bellows and roars, to signal size. Dogs do it. Red deer do it. Koalas do it. And now we can add humans to that list. Because a new study suggests we can size up other people by the sound of their roar alone. First, researchers took the circumference of 61 men's and women's biceps, measured their grip strength and their height. Then, they told them to let loose a roar.
I'd probably describe it as the most hellish version of Groundhog Day that you can think of.
Jordan Rain, a behavioral ethologist at the University of Sussex.
If you just imagine 30 actors in training coming into a small room one after another and roaring at you, it was an experience, that's for sure.
His team then played those roars back to a separate group of male and female listeners who'd also been measured for strength and size. They found that men correctly rated other men as substantially stronger than them 90% of the time, based on roar alone. Men did tend to underestimate women's strength by the sound of their roars, and women overestimated men's strength. But in general, roaring like a wild animal, it seemed like a pretty accurate way to telegraph body size and strength. The researchers also found that regular shouting, "That's enough! I'm coming for you!" did not seem to have the same effect as a roar.
So what the roaring is actually doing is having this exaggerative effect on strength, which is very similar to the adaptations that non-human mammals possess that allow them to exaggerate their strength when they roar as well.
The full results and more roars are in the journal iScience. The finding could have practical, real-world applications, too. For example, soldiers have roared in battle throughout history to attempt to intimidate the enemy.
And the US National Park Service actually recommends roaring as a defense strategy against bears.
Just hope that the bear's hearing is better than their eyesight. Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Christopher Intagliata.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Pools, water parks, and other recreational water venues are popular places to relax and stay cool, but they can be sources of serious illness. Since 2000, nearly 500 outbreaks have been reported at recreational water venues in the U.S., resulting in over 27,000 illnesses and 8 deaths. Most were caused by parasites, bacteria, viruses, or certain chemicals in the water. Parents with young children who have diarrhea should not allow their children to swim or play in the water. In addition, bathers should check the inspection scores of pools and water parks and can conduct mini inspections using test strips before getting in the water. A few simple precautions can allow you to share the fun, not the germs. Thank you for joining us on A Minute of Health with CDC.
For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
It's Thursday, June 28, 2018.
We will vote to confirm Justice Kennedy's successor this fall.
Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy's retirement is bad news for the climate.
For the people who live here, there's nothing to come home to. Burn to scrap and ash.
New wildfires hit Northern California and 5 other states. Federal judge dismisses San Francisco's climate liability lawsuit. Plus,
when we decide to take action, the world by default gets better.
Bright spots in the primaries as progressive climate hawks win upset victories.
All of that upset and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Nature is not a political game.
It is now, Governor Brown, and the bad guys just rolled Yahtzee. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, lots of concerns about whoever the replacement may be for Justice Anthony Kennedy, and, of course, concerns about the climate along with it.
Yep. Kennedy's retirement from the U.S. Supreme Court is an ominous development that could bring about sweeping changes to both U.S. environmental law and the federal government's authority to address climate change. So it's potentially bad not just for the nation, but for the planet and future generations because of the need to act on climate right now. Justice Kennedy's record was pretty positive overall on environmental protection. He was the crucial 5th vote in the landmark ruling Massachusetts versus EPA, which upheld the Environmental Protection Agency's authority to regulate the greenhouse gases that cause dangerous climate change. A more conservative Supreme Court could overhaul established public health protections like the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act and even the Endangered Species Act. And significant climate policy and pollution lawsuits are now headed to the U.S. Supreme Court, like President Obama's Clean Power Plan that set the first ever carbon emission standards for power plants. Bottom line, adding another anti-environment, anti-regulation, right-wing justice like Neil Gorsuch to the bench will likely push the court to further restrict the scope of federal authority and limit environmental justice.
You know, I wish I had a snarky comment here, but I really don't.
I don't blame you. Speaking of justice, a climate liability lawsuit against major oil companies that was brought by the cities of San Francisco and Oakland was dismissed by a federal judge this week. The cities were seeking damages to pay for the costs and impacts of rising sea levels. In his ruling, District Court Judge William Alsup called the dangers of climate change, quote, very real, and noted that the fossil fuel companies did not dispute that burning their products causes global warming. But he said that it is a global global problem that requires a global solution beyond the court's power to provide, and said that Congress and the executive branch must solve it.
Oh, well, that should go very well.
So ExxonMobil, BP, and Chevron escaped blame for those public costs, but other ongoing climate liability lawsuits continue to wend their way through state and local courts.
So this is just one judge who turned down this suit. Other judges may see it completely differently?
That's correct.
Of course, if they do, those cases, I suspect, will go all the way to the Supreme Court, and then they'll die.
We'll just have to see.
Too cynical?
Meanwhile, 4 new wildfires have erupted in Northern California amid high winds and high temperatures, including one less than 20 miles away from the catastrophic and deadly wine country fires last fall that obliterated entire neighborhoods. The Pawnee fire has already destroyed homes and forced thousands to evacuate. It is Lake County, California's 4th major wildfire in just 4 years. A new study concludes that U.S. oil and gas drillers are leaking far more methane than previously estimated by the federal government, some 60% more. Led by the Environmental Defense Fund, the study, published in the journal Science, estimates that about $2 billion worth of natural gas is lost to leaks every year in the United States, enough to heat 10 million homes. Because methane is a powerful greenhouse gas, it has a big impact on climate change. But the good news, the authors say, is that most of the leakage can be stopped at relatively low cost to industry. Finally, there is a bright spot of good news.
I'll take it.
Progressive climate hawk candidates scored upset victories in 2018 primary elections this week. In Utah, Navajo Kenneth Maryboy unseated incumbent Rebecca Benally for San Juan County Commissioner. Benally supported the Trump administration's gutting of the Bears Ears National Monument boundaries against the wishes of the majority of Navajo tribal members in the state.
And the voters tossed her out?
Yes, they did.
Good for them.
And in the New York primary, progressive candidate and climate hawk Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez won the Democratic nomination for House District 14 against longtime incumbent Democratic Representative Joe Crowley. Ocasio-Cortez calls for transitioning the nation to 100% renewable electricity by 2035.
Go Alexandria. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find us, follow us, and please share us worldwide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Hold your head up. Hold your head up. Hold your head up. Hold your head high. Hold your head up.
You can help stop the Trump agenda in its tracks. Make sure you're registered to vote. Go to rockthevote.org. And on November 6th, vote for Democrats up and down the ticket. This message, a public service from all the fine people of netrootsradio.com.
From UN headquarters in New York, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 minutes. Weeks after North Korean Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un pledged to, quote, work toward complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, new satellite imagery obtained by the DC group 38 North reveals a flurry of continued activity at one of North Korea's top nuclear sites.
What we've noticed in the latest satellite imagery is continued work at the experimental light water reactor, continued operation of the centrifuge plant, and a general upkeep and activity around the entire facility.
Joe Bermudez is a senior analyst at 38 North.
We also suspect that they might have smaller facilities around the country, maybe 1 or 2, that can also produce some fissile material.
And that, explains Bermudez, is because North Korea is engaged in a campaign of camouflage, concealment, and deception with its WMD program. All of that aimed at keeping the outside world guessing about its nuclear capabilities. But asked if the activity at the Yongbyon Nuclear Scientific Research Center marks a breach of agreements made between Trump and Kim in Singapore, Bermudez says it's hard to tell, thanks to a near total lack of details in a joint statement signed by the two men.
Well, at present, there is no deal. There is the beginning of an agreement, and what denuclearize means needs to be defined. Likely, if everything went as well as it could, what it would mean is the denuclear weaponization of North Korea. as opposed to the complete denuclearization.
Given that North Korea is starved for energy and surrounded by South Korea, China, and Japan, each of which possesses robust nuclear energy capabilities, it's unlikely Kim Jong-un would give up his own, especially if no agreement explicitly forces him to do so.
With North Korea, the devil's always in the details.
Luke Vargas, The United Nations.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all Nighthawks in the diner of life. And, I failed to mention, well, here, you're at the chef's table. Let's have a little bit to imbibe, and it is always, of course, the French 77. Just like the French 75, substitute the simple syrup in the French 75 for the elderberry flower liqueur, and Saint Germain is the elderberry flower liqueur of choice here at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And there you have the French 77, the most balanced cocktail in the history of cocktails. And we've done our research. Yes, we have. Okay, well, this weekend is the International Rooster Crowing Contest. They call it Rooster Crow here in Rogue River, Oregon. And so we will have people from all over the world bringing their cocks to crow. I wanted to sell T-shirts that say, don't be a dick, be a cock. But they thought maybe the kids might not understand. And I'm like, well, come on. Shouldn't they know the original intent? Because I do live in a very conservative, gun-bearing town, by the way. And every year, I've stopped asking now because it's gotten to be old hat. But I always ask, is the Dixie swastika going to be in the parade again this year in Rooster Crow? So we'll see. We won't have the boat races. Yeah, there's a river big enough to have boat races. I've done boat races and did security with my brother when he had his security company a long time ago. And we ran security for a few big events, and one was the boat races in Southern California at Irvine Lake. And this river, it can be treacherous for swimming and kayaking and any number of those things. But boat races, I'm like, I don't think it's big enough for that. But you never know. So, currently here along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America for Rooster Crow Weekend here in Rogue River. Rogue River is lovely. There's a lot more liberals than I make out there to be. But the gun toters, I don't know, it's kind of quaint. It's like going to an old western town in a way, except they have real bullets. So when they have these reenactments about seceding from the United States of America, you don't know. You don't know if they're real bullets or they're blanks. So you have to be careful. I kid. It's not like that. Okay, well, currently we are, temperature here is what? No way. Okay, well, it looks like they say that it's 56, but I think it's a little warmer than that. But I'll take them at their word. It's 56, 58 degrees, we'll say. We are supposed to be a bit warmer today, upper 80s, low 90s, and we'll be in the low to mid 90s tomorrow for the full day of events. Actually, Rooster Crow Weekend begins today, so there are events today, but the parade will be tomorrow. And then lots more events, lots of music and good food and all sorts of crafts and other wares to be sold and viewed, and an art show and all sorts of neat things. So if you happen to be in the area, come or plan it for next year. It's fun. It really is. And it's just not here in Rogue River. There's all sorts of things to do all up and down the Rogue River Valley. Yeah. Thank you, Glacier. Thank you, volcanoes, for etching out our valley. Thank you. All right. So right now, it looks like, well, dry conditions will continue. High pressure dominates at 30.04 inches. Visibility is up to 10 miles. Humidity is 70% and falling. Grass pollen is high. The air quality index is good at 15 parts per million, but it is inching up towards the part where it's only going to be moderate. And the daytime UV index remains very high at 9, and we know what to do about that. Sunscreen, my friends, sunscreen. Okay, so weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. Okay, the fellow in London, or just outside of London proper, is registering 80 degrees and sunny on his machine. Paris is 84 and sunny, and it looks like they have a weather advisory, I presume is for heat. And I went to the Paris window here at the Weather Underground, but they have a glitch. But they still have this advisory, and just knowing from my experience, if it's 84 and sunny, it could be for heat, or it could be the beginning of this thunderstorm season. That means it can get humid and very, very bad. Rome is 83 and fair. Wait a second. Paris is never really, really bad. But when it's humid, in July, August, after Bastille Day, that's when people start heading out of town and getting to the coast, wherever that might be, or the Alps. Get cool. And, okay, so, all right. Rome is 83 and fair. Kiev is 81 and fair. Kabul is 82 degrees and fair. Not a good time to have a wedding party this weekend. Looks like they'll have heavy drones. Looks like, yeah, it'll be heavy drones. Let's go on. Hong Kong is 81 and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 79 and partly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 49 degrees and fair. San Francisco, California is 55 and sunny with their continuing wind advisory on the bay for small crafts. On the bay and offshore. And New York is 81 degrees and sunny, and you are in a heat advisory. So it looks like you're going to be getting even hotter today. So take care. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property. And these people positively live around the world. First offering here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, is an article out of The Conversation by Sylvain Charlebois, professor in food distribution and policy at Dalhousie University. Now, of course, The Conversation is a Australian paper, publication, journal. And they're writing about Canada. And we're, ostensibly in America, as far as I know, here in the southern Oregon region of the United States. And Dalhousie University is in Quebec. So that's almost a country unto itself as well. I love how we get our information, because you got to get out of where you're at. Oh, well, Trump has inspired Canadians to boycott American products. Who thought that could happen? Because Canadians love us, and we love Canadians. I don't know what the hell happened. In a nutshell, here's what happened at the G7 summit. Justin Trudeau played nice with Trump. Trump tore Trudeau apart on social media. Trudeau played nice again, while Trudeau showed very Canadian diplomacy, poise, and resilience. The Canadian public seems to be taking another approach. Everywhere on social media, Canadians are encouraging one another to go Trump-free. That is, to shop for groceries without buying a single American product. Trump is now America. The world sees Trump as America and America as Trump. We, the people, no longer exist. The great experiment, I don't know, the test tube, there's something happened. Maybe it wasn't Pyrex. Did they even have Pyrex back then? No, they didn't.
Danser maintenant sous l'été, les pieds nus dans le sable. Danser maintenant et jeter vos ennuis dans les vagues qui dansent.
More worker bees at the Agence France Press bring us this last offering here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life. French Holocaust survivor and women's rights icon Simone Veil will be given the rare honor of burial at the Pantheon in Paris on Sunday, a year and a day after her death at age 89. Veil's death prompted an outpouring of emotion across the country, and I would say across the world, because I was one of them, with thousands signing a petition asking President Emmanuel Macron to bury her alongside France's most illustrious dignitaries. She will be only the fifth woman inhumed at the monument on the left bank of the River Seine, and will be accompanied by her husband Antoine, a high-ranking civil servant who died in 2013. Mom never thought she would be placed in the Pantheon. The only one in the couple who imagined she would enter Pantheon was our father, said Jean Veil, the oldest of her three sons. He would often say jokingly that it was out of the question to separate them after 67 years of living together, he told C News Television. Simone Veil was 16 when she was deported in 1944 to Auschwitz during the Holocaust. When her mother, father, and brother were killed, after her return, she became a tireless crusader for women's rights as well as European reconciliation, securing her biggest political victory in 1974 by convincing Parliament to legalize abortion despite fierce opposition. She also became the first elected president of the European Parliament in 1979, a post she held for 3 years. A model of composure, Veil was considered by many a secular saint for her unwavering stance on moral issues. Polls consistently showed her to be one of France's most popular and trusted figures. The fact that we have built Europe has reconciled me with the 20th century despite living with the trauma of the Holocaust, Veil once said in a television interview. The transfer of Veil's remains to the Pantheon begins today, when her casket and that of her husband will be exhumed at the Montparnasse Cemetery. Their coffins will then be displayed for 2 days in the crypt of the Holocaust Memorial in central Paris, which Veil helped found. On Sunday morning, the funeral cortege will be escorted by Republican guards over the Seine and through the Latin Quarter. Pallbearers will carry the caskets up the Rue Soufflot, walking on a blue carpet, the color of peace, and the United Nations, and, of course, Europe, Macron said. They will pause 3 times to sing, including the Song of the Deported. President Emmanuel Macron, attending with his wife Brigitte, and dozens of French officials will give a speech followed by a minute of silence. The Marseillaise national anthem will then be sung by the American soprano, Barbara Hendricks. And the caskets will lie in state until Monday, and admission to the Pantheon will be free from July 1st to July 8th. Veil was already given a state funeral, and commemorative €2 coins will enter circulation in July, along with postage stamps bearing her image. And last month, Paris renamed a metro stop Europe Simone Veil in her honor. And a great woman she was indeed. All right, a great honor, too. All right, folks, we're at the end of our broadcast period for today and the week, but Networks Radio broadcasts on for breaking news. We'll meet up with you tomorrow for River City Hash Mondays, and we'll be around all next week for our show, so you'll have up-to-the-date comment and content. Oh, yes. So stay tuned for that. And, of course, this weekend, who knows what's going to happen. It'll be chock full of news, and I'll give you a little rundown about Rooster Crow weekend, too. Okay, a little bit of small-town America. We love it. All right, stay tuned to Networks Radio for the rest of the day and the weekend, and we will visit with you on Monday in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver.